Great. Thanks, everybody. Is this good to go? All right. How is everyone doing today? Was today a great day at SATURN? Beautiful San Diego. All right, I'm going to now get you all super depressed. The very first time that I ran this talk, it made the entire audience cry. All right, so I have revamped it considerably and arranged for a baseball game. Okay, so I'm hoping it goes much better this time. Moral of the story, user testing is very important. Hi, my name is Michael Keeling. I'm here to talk to you today about thinking about ethics as a quality attribute. So let's start off with a thought experiment. Okay, so imagine that you are a software architect on a team, and you have been brought in on a project that's been going on for a little while. And you look at the system, things just aren't happening the way everyone wants them to be happening. You look at the business drivers and you say, you know what, I think we can cut the complexity down, we can automate a bunch of things, we can eliminate a lot of components here, and we can ship in half the time. We can actually get this thing out the door. There's a catch, though. By refactoring the architecture in that way, you have also just put 50% of the developers out of a job, right? What do you do? And I had the very, unfortunate opportunity to meet someone who is in this very situation. It's tricky, right? And it's kind of a bummer. Depending on your kind of philosophy on how you approach this, you might reach different conclusions as well. There's no single answer to this, right? So if you were looking at, from a virtue ethics perspective, you would consider the character of the architect, right? Am I a virtuous kind of person in making these decisions, doing them for the right reasons? If Aristotle were this architect, he would say, yeah, it's okay to lie, if your intentions are the virtuous type, right? The trick with virtues, though, is they're not really all that universal, right? So they vary from country to country, culture to culture. And loyalty, that's a great virtue, except for, who are you loyal to in this situation? To your developers, to the business, to your customers? Aristotle wouldn't know what to do, probably. Let's consider a different philosophy. So, if you were looking at utilitarianism, you would look at the consequences and try and understand, what is the greater good? Okay, so John Stuart Mill, he would tell you, it's okay to tell a lie as long as that lie, causes, more pleasure or more happiness than telling the truth would have done, right? So John Stuart Mill, he says, you know what? Ship sooner. Go ahead, fire all those people. Let's do it fast. We can help a lot of people with our software, right? Very, utility-driven kind of perspective. All right, deontological ethics, a little bit different. So in this case, there are certain rules or maxims that you would consider to be universally true in any situation, right? So it is never okay to lie because lying is wrong, right? Even if you have the best intentions, even if the result is good, you just can't do it. All right, so if Immanuel Kant was our architect in this case, he would say, you know what, workforce reduction, we have to do the right thing by our business, by our customers, we're going to ship early. However, we need to do it in a way that is humane and honorable to the people that we're letting go. Maybe give them a couple of extra weeks to transition into a new role or find different places within their, within the company. Tricky situation, right? In each one of these cases, though, what these philosophers are doing and what you would be doing in this case would be to weighing the potential harm that your decision could make against the potential good that you create relative to whoever your stakeholders are. I don't know, kind of cool stuff to think about. And architects, I guess, we're put into situations like this every day, right? And it's not easy decisions to make, like this one, right? So Google Doodle, who loves Pac-Man here? Everybody loves Pac-Man. Pac-Man is awesome. This Google Doodle in particular, I spent, 20 minutes playing Pac-Man, and it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of, JavaScript in the browser and all the cool things that we could do with the modern web technology stack, right? There's a dark side to this particular Google Doodle. 4.8 million hours of lost productivity that day from people just like me, right? Somewhere between 120 and almost $300 million US lost, right? That sounds awful, right? Like a really bad thing to do. But 500 million, over 500 million happy people that day. Talk about spreading the joy, right? Was that the right thing for those Google engineers to do? Tough call, right? I don't know. So Right, let's try and put this back in the framework of architects, right? So one of the tools that we have in our bag are quality attributes, and that's kind of why I proposed this talk, was to think about this a little bit more, and are there tools that we have as architects to help us reason about these sort of dilemmas? So let's have another little thought experiment here, and this time we will explore some of the quality attributes perhaps that we can address with this. So all right, let's say that you're put in charge of another system. You're the project lead. There's an extremely tight deadline. It's critical to the success of the company that this all goes through. You know that there's going to have to be overtime. It's just going to be one of those crunch time situations, right? And I'm sure everybody has experienced something like this at some point in their career. I know I have. I put on 20 pounds and was working 80 or 90-hour weeks thanks to the food that they kept feeding us to come into work every day. But we survived, I survived, made it through. All right, so if you're the architect on this system, top quality attributes, normal stuff, right? Availability, time to market, costs, right? It's a crunch time kind of situation. You've got to get the software shipped very quickly. Just to make it a little bit interesting though, let's go ahead and throw in these other two things that are also highly desirable. So maybe we also want to consider the sustainability of the system. In this case, considering the impact on the environment. And then just for kicks, we'll throw in some maintainability too, because we all love maintainability. Right, so what are the ethical implications, if any, right, of these quality attributes for this particular system? All right, availability is actually probably the most obvious one on this list. Right, so when your system goes down, it could potentially cause harm to users, right, to your customers in some way. That itself is not necessarily bad. You have to think about the SLAs and kind of setting the correct expectations, things like that. Things get a little more interesting, though, when you start to talk about what do you do about the downtime, right? Should you compensate your customers if your system was down and it was supposed to be up? I don't know. Maybe. What happens if your system causes harm when it goes down in some way, right? So say digital medical record system, right? Something like that based on the cloud. If that goes down, you're causing tons of harm, right? The scenario starts to get a lot more interesting thinking about it that way. Time to market. So I guess with the availability stuff, you can address that mostly with any common availability scenario. So I'm not going to kind of dive into that anymore. Time to market, kind of interesting here. So how much stress do you put under, how much stress do you put on your team when trying to build this system, and how much tension are you willing to put on to maintainability, right? So that's kind of an interesting question, and I wonder if, is it possible for us to frame a quality attribute scenario that can capture that kind of a concern, right? So kind of a normalish thing, so the development team delivering in increments. Basically what we want to happen with our response and response measure, we don't drive everybody away, right? So at the end of the project, you still have a team. Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe maybe retention is not the right metric for this, but it certainly seems like an interesting thing to think about. Measuring this stuff turns out to be very tricky. So I probably didn't get this right, but if you have thoughts, I'd love to talk about it more. Costs. Okay, so costs have a lot of implications that we actually have control over as architects, right? So in some cases, fair wages, proper accounting, doing procurement in the right ways, things like that, right? And unfortunately, many of us have probably witnessed or experienced unethical practices in this space, right? So purposefully reducing wages so that you can keep your costs down, based on whatever practice you try and justify. Probably not cool, right? Just not good. Outsourcing at less than fair prices, so purposefully taking advantage of different, cost of living to drive your costs down. I don't know. Is that an unethical thing to do? Probably, maybe, depending on how you're going about it. And straight up lying and hours reporting, totally bad, right? Violating open source. We've got code scans and stuff to help us not do these types of things, but there's always that temptation. It's just a little copy-paste, right? You're totally stealing intellectual property when you do things like that. I like this one at the bottom here, so knowingly shipping junk. I love this quote from Bob Martin, we don't ship shit, right? So that's, I think, one of the mantras that we try and have at our office is, not purposefully just shipping junk software. All right, environmental sustainability I think is interesting, and there's many facets of sustainability that you could go into. It was Earth Day when I made this slide deck, so I went for the environmental stuff. But especially as we're looking more and more towards cloud-based systems and data centers that we rent, what is the overall impact of our software that we're building on the environment, right? So you could ask the question, is it really worth me getting my iPhone app to market quickly in somebody's cloud if it means 4 generations from now everyone on the planet is doomed? Maybe not. It's something to think about. Can we capture that as a quality attribute scenario? If you cared to, you probably could, right? So you could talk about things like the carbon footprint or the impact on emissions or things like this. And there actually are companies who are doing a great job with this, right? So I read a report by Apple who got dinged a few years ago for very, very bad environmental practices. They now have carbon neutral data centers, which I think is very interesting. Google spends a lot of its money and a lot of its effort on reducing electricity costs. I want to say they have something like a 20 or 40% reduction in their carbon output because of that work. So it is possible to do these things. We just kind of have to raise these concerns, as architects and put them on the list with the other quality attributes that we think are important. So maintainability is something else. Is this really an ethical concern? Maybe not, right? So mainly when I think about this, I think about the craftsmanship, technical debt, and how we're communicating as a team. And I'm going to go ahead and just assert that this is not effective communication necessarily. So many bad diagrams out there, and maybe as architects we have a moral imperative to do a better job communicating with other people, right? So that's why conferences like SATURN are so great. So anyway, so in all these cases, who are your stakeholders? What can cause them harm, right? These are the things that you should be thinking about. What is the potential good that you can create for them? And then who is responsible for deciding that, right? In many cases, the things that I'm talking about today, you can probably handle implicitly. You don't have to specifically enumerate your ethical concerns as quality attribute scenarios. But it's kind of an interesting thought exercise to do that, right? And in some cases, safety critical systems, privacy, security, perhaps even things like environmental sustainability, perhaps it's the right thing to do. Notice, however, that I did not list any of those things as quality attributes when I was going through our thought experiment, right? So just because you're not on a safety critical system, it does not mean that you don't have some kind of an obligation here, okay? My main thing, you have the power and the responsibility to do what is right, as the architect, and to kind of simplify a lot of the philosophy and hopefully boil it down to something that you can apply day to day. I'm going to use, the best ethical philosophy ever: just be excellent to each other. Thank you, George. So, thank you, everybody. Have a great conference. Nobody's crying, right? So we're okay?
So what if you're a software architect and you work at an automobile manufacturer and your boss asks you, are there ways to pass these utilization tests?
Excellent question. Yeah, maybe more people should have been at my talk before they started making those decisions. That was actually some of the stuff that I had. Originally this talk, the thought experiment I opened with was the no-win situation with an autonomous vehicle. And that's a tricky thing, with the IoT, drones everywhere, with more and more systems. We're talking about billions and billions of devices. Just because, we can build these things, should we be building these things? How much does consumerism drive into what we're doing? These are questions that I don't think we're asking enough. And part of why I wanted to try and think about these things and raise awareness in our community to start to, exactly because of the, people sneaking around emissions tests, right? Just to pad their numbers. Some system architect somewhere decided that was okay, and that's just unfortunate. Anybody else? Good. Yep. George, you got one in the back?
Do we have an ethical obligation to be good at what we do, otherwise say that I shouldn't be doing this thing? So for example, if you want your roof fixed, right, and a guy says, sure, I'll do that for you, but he has no idea how to do it, we might think, like, who are you to be saying yes to that job if you don't know how to do it?
Yeah, so George's question was, do we have an ethical obligation to be good at our job? And if you aren't good at your job, should you maybe find something else that you're actually good at? You can start moving on. Sure. Yeah, I think we do have an ethical obligation to be good at our job. And if you go to the, let's see here, link at the bottom here, the ACM Code of Ethics, which is about 20 pages long, it follows the Immanuel Kant kind of approach that we have certain maxims that we as software engineers should follow. Quick show of hands, who has actually read that? We've got all of 4 or 5 people. Okay, so homework. Please go read that. And yeah, if you guys want to talk more, let's chat at the baseball game. So, thank you very much.